Hey everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about today. So today, as we're continuing our unit on taxation, everybody's favorite, we're going to be specifically talking about state taxes and what those are used for, how those are collected, and how they are different from federal taxes that we talked about yesterday. Let's go ahead and get started. So today we're going to be talking about state taxes. Now, all states are different, and they all have to find a way of getting revenue through taxes to have money to pay for the things that they need to. Every state cuts that pie a little differently. I'm in North Carolina. Most of the people watching this are going to be in North Carolina, but there's going to be people outside of North Carolina that are watching this as well. So just FYI, I'm going to use North Carolina as the example here because if you try to compare different states and the way they do stuff, the pie doesn't always add up right. So sticking with one state and using them as a reference point for how taxes are collected at the state level is the most effective way of doing this. So North Carolina is going to be our example today because it's the one I know the best. So let's start out talking about income taxes. And you're like, Mr. Wagstaff, pretty sure that we talked about income taxes yesterday. And you would be correct. We did talk about income taxes yesterday. However, those are federal income taxes. On top of paying federal income taxes, you, in addition to that, have to pay state income taxes. Now, federal income taxes are pretty high. Your state income taxes are not as high, but it is a substantial amount of money. It varies from state to state. Not only does it vary from state to state, there's different ways that they tax. But in North Carolina, all right, it is 5.25% is the income tax that you'll pay. So on any amount of income that you make, in addition to paying for the federal, and we're still talking about gross. It's not like the federal income tax is a pre-tax deduction and then you pay 5% left on what's left. It is all based on your gross taxes. So in addition to your federal taxes, you're going to pay 5% of your total income to the state. Now, North Carolina has what's called a flat tax, 5.25%. So this alone, this little map here, different states and what their rates are. This is why I have to stick with one state to explain how taxes are collected. To clarify that, so even when it comes to state income taxes, all states are really different. So North Carolina has a flat income tax, meaning whether you make $1 billion a year or 30 cents, you pay 5.25% of that in taxes. All right. The lowest income tax bracket at the federal level is 10% or 12%. So it's still less than that, but everybody pays the same, unlike the federal, which the more you make, the higher percentage you make. Some states also do that. All right. So that's the list on the right. That is the states, and that list is much longer than, if you don't see a state you're looking for on here, they're going to be on that list on the right because it goes down much further. That's a graduated income tax, meaning it is a progressive income tax. The more money you make, the higher percentage you make, or the higher percentage you pay. On the left, you might notice this, these are states with no income tax. They don't pay it at all, which means they got to get their revenue by upping the other taxes in another way. So whenever you see professional athletes, and this is interesting, and I'll use in my mind because it's 2023, last year, Tyreek Hill is a NFL wide receiver, and again, depending on if you're watching it recently, you know who Tyreek Hill is. Otherwise, you may not if this is in the future. Anyway, he just signed a gargantuan deal to leave Kansas City, the Kansas City Chiefs, to go to the Miami Dolphins to play football. While he said that Kansas City gave him the same amount of money as the Miami Dolphins in order to stay with Kansas City, which is in Missouri, all right? Missouri's on a graduated income tax, meaning he's making $1 gazillion a year. He would pay a ton in state income tax. Or he'd go play in Miami And even though it's the same amount of money, he doesn't have to pay income tax on that in Miami because that's in Florida. And that was one of his decisions in taking the deal and moving teams, is because he would be in a state he didn't have to pay state income tax on. So state income tax is a legitimate, important way for the state to make money. It is completely separate from the federal income tax. Usually it is way less than the federal income tax. I believe all states are considerably less than the federal income tax. But it is in addition to federal income tax, two completely separate jars of money that they go into. So the question here is, what is the difference between federal and state income taxes? So pause me, answer that completely. We're moving on. So one of the things North Carolina does that makes a large amount of money is sales tax. So of all the money, and this is 2013, just grabbing random ones, and even though the numbers should expand over time with this due to inflation, the pie chart should relatively remain the same for North Carolina. If you notice, almost 25%, 23.5% to be exact, 23.5% of all the money North Carolina takes in is through sales tax, all right? 46.6%, almost half, that is through income tax that we just talked about, all right? Another, a quarter of the revenue that the state comes in is state sales tax. So in North Carolina, the sales tax is 4.75%. That can vary in every different state. There's some states that don't even have a sales tax. And again, you can't not tax on anything, but you still have to have money. So states that probably don't have income tax probably have a higher sales tax, and you have to make up the money somehow. But in North Carolina, we have a flat income tax and a sales tax rate of 4.75%, which means every time you buy something, you have to add 4.75% to it. So at least, if you're like, I'm pretty sure taxes are higher than that if you're thinking about it, we get to local taxes tomorrow. Local towns and counties, they can actually add addition to that. So we'll get to that in the next one. We'll start talking about local taxes tomorrow. So what that means is the person who pays the sales tax is the person that is buying the product. All right. So say you buy something for $60, and in this figurative, I just showing you the math. Say the tax rate was 7.5%. So you would multiply 60 times 0.075. That's how you take the percentage into a decimal. That would be $4.50. So you would take the $4.50, add this to the $60, and it's $64.50. So if you go buy something at the store that says it's 99 cents, it's not 99 cents. It's going to be like $1.05, $1.06 because sales tax is added on. It is calculated by the percentage of, it's calculated by the percentage of how much you buy. So it's not a flat rate. So the more you spend money on, the higher taxes. If it's 4% and you buy a $10,000 vehicle, you then have to turn around and pay $400 on that. Is that right? Yeah, you have to pay $400 in taxes, so it'd be $10,400 is a 4% tax, sales tax. So it's based on the percentage of how much you are paying. So it's a percentage. So the more money you buy something for, the higher the sales tax is. So what are we doing with all of our money? All right, if we make this money, well, as we mentioned yesterday, and I'm going to mention education a couple times here. The federal government, while it does have somewhat of a hand, really a pinky into the education concept, the states are responsible for providing education to everybody. They're required to provide education, and they have to spend their money on it. So while the United States government spends a lot of taxes on the military, on Social Security, on Medicaid, and Medicare, and these other things, like North Carolina, as is the case with almost all states, the majority of the budget goes to education. Public schools are funded by the state, and it is usually the largest part of the budget in almost all states. The other things that get paid for with the tax money in North Carolina, health and human services, we'll talk a little bit about that, and like justice and public safety, like police officers. And so that is really the breakdown, the main focus of the tax revenue that we get in North Carolina. So the question here is, how is sales tax typically calculated? And really what you need to understand here is it's a percentage. So it's not like you have to pay $1 on everything that you buy. It's a percentage. So the more expensive something is, the more you have to spend on it. So pause me, answer that completely. We're moving on. All right. So excise taxes are really important in North Carolina. You're like, didn't we talk about excise taxes yesterday? Yes, we did. There's excise taxes by the federal government that is on gasoline, which is separate from sales tax. There is also an excise tax by the state on gasoline as well. You're like, are we just taxing everything? Yes, we are. That's how society works. Everything gets taxed. Tons of your money goes to taxes. So while sales tax bring in a whole bunch of money and it goes into like the general fund, which can be used for education, police, things like that, excise taxes are used for more specific things. All right. So we talked about yesterday that the federal government puts an excise tax on gasoline, all right, at a fixed rate. So in all 50 states, it's the same excise tax that they use to help build bridges and like interstate highways. So the states also have the ability to put an excise tax, and we're going to stick with gasoline here. So in addition to the federal tax on gas, there is a state tax on gas, all right? And all the states differ in how much that is. So I want to bring into focus here, this is gas taxes, excise taxes, additions to the taxes in your state. I want to point out North Carolina here. 35 cents per gallon is added in an excise tax. If you notice, South Carolina, just below North Carolina, is 20 cents. Actually, 21 cents, 20.75. All right. So North Carolina has one of the higher taxes on gas. All right. South Carolina has one of the lower ones. So gas in South Carolina is cheaper. If you live in North Carolina and you ever go like vacation in Myrtle Beach, which is in South Carolina, you'll notice as soon as you cross the border that the gas is way cheaper. And people are always like, oh, the gas is so much cheaper in South Carolina. Well, there's a reason for that. So it's an excise tax, meaning it is specifically earmarked for roads. So all that money that people in North Carolina make from taxes, from the taxes on gas, go to pay for the roads. Just like all the money that South Carolina makes off their excise tax goes to roads. Saw this picture the other day and I thought that I had to show it to you. This is an actual aerial photograph of North Carolina and South Carolina. That's the border. Look at the roads. North Carolina roads are in pretty fantastic shape. Generally speaking, if you live here, there always seems to be construction going on, but we don't really have bad roads. Our roads are great. It's actually rare to see a pothole that exists for much of any amount of time. Maybe if you're in the city somewhere and it's hard to get to, but our roads are in fantastic shape. South Carolina, by comparison, if you're from North Carolina and you go to South Carolina, it's easy to pick on them because the roads aren't in great shape. And the reason that is they have like almost a third less, actually they have more than a third less revenue to fix their roads than North Carolina does because of their tax on gasoline. So yes, North Carolina has a little bit higher taxes on gasoline, but we also have much better roads that are more effective and aren't going to jack up your car. Because if you spend any time in South Carolina, roads aren't fantastic. And that is directly due to the increase in taxes on gasoline. Another excise tax on alcohol. While the federal government also puts an excise tax on alcohol, North Carolina does as well. 22% of all of the price of alcohol in North Carolina is on excise, on liquor especially, is an excise tax. So what is that for? Well, in North Carolina provides rehabilitation stuff. So if you're an alcoholic and trying to get, there are state-funded programs paid for with the excise taxes from the sale of alcohol in order to help people recover if they find themselves addicted to alcohol. Another thing, North Carolina has a police force called the ALE, the Alcohol Law Enforcement. They don't just deal with alcohol, but gambling, tobacco, and they are funded like solely off of the sale of alcohol. So what a lot of times these guys do is, when it comes to alcohol, is like look for people trying to like make moonshine and stuff, because if you make alcohol illegally and it's not done right, it can obviously just be straight poison. So people that are not paying taxes on alcohol or trying to make it illegally, they also are involved with that, and that is paid for with the excise taxes from the sale of alcohol. So what's important to understand here, and this is what the question is who pays the cost of excise taxes? It's the consumer, all right? So if you don't want to fund these things, like if you don't want to fund the roads, then don't buy gasoline. If you don't want to fund the ALE, or you don't want to fund the state-funded programs, to help people that are alcoholics, don't buy alcohol. So the question is, who ultimately pays the cost of the excise taxes? And that's the consumer. Because the people that buy this, it's a direct tax that goes back and helps the same people that are purchasing the product from the state. So pause me, answer that completely. We're moving on. All right, property tax. Property tax is a huge one, and we're going to use North Carolina here as an example kind of differently than we have in the other ones. So property tax. What is property tax? So property tax is a tax on your property, but not just any property. It's only your really, really, really big ticket items, all right? So here's the things that you generally have to pay a tax on every year in order to keep it. Even if you've completely paid it off, you still have to pay taxes on it every year. Like if you have a house and a car are the two most common that you're going to pay property tax on. If you have a boat or an airplane, those also, there's some, for business or whatever, that's getting too technical. Those you also have to pay property tax on. All right, and it's a percentage of what it is assessed with. So obviously, a car, it's not. You might pay $100 a year on a car. Completely, it can vary. So I would say, and I'm going to be dangerous here in 2023. Basically, you pay $100 per year for every $10,000 your car is worth. I'm going to risk that there as a general idea. So if your car is worth $10,000, you pay $100. If it was $20,000, you would pay $200 per year. A house, you're probably going to pay a couple $1,000s per year on your property tax for your house. So that seems like a lot, all right? And it is, but in the grand scheme of things, interesting here, that it is actually relatively small in North Carolina. North Carolina has a relatively small property tax rate, one of the smaller property tax rates that exist. So what is interesting, I want to put this map up here. If you see, I that key's kind of confusing, how it goes like brown to orange and light blue, dark blue, kind of all over the place. Basically, the Northeast has much higher property taxes. All right. So if you lived in, let's say, New Jersey, your property tax for the same house that you might pay $2,000 on in North Carolina, it could be $7,000 or $8,000 in New Jersey, all right, or Pennsylvania or New York, all right. The property taxes are way higher up there, and the reason that is because property taxes in a state are very often directly connected to the amount of money the state is paying their teachers. So while if you notice here that the property taxes are lower in the South and more expensive in the North, this is how much teachers make in every state. Remember, the states are responsible for paying their teachers, all right? So the places that have higher property taxes, the teachers make more money. Like North Carolina, the average teacher makes $45,000. In Pennsylvania, just a couple states up, the exact same job, $65,000. New York is $80,000. And it's the exact same job and the exact same degree, depending on what state you live in. The reason that matters, the reason teacher pay matters, is you might be thinking, well, golly, like if you want to make more money, just move to another state. Well, that's what a lot of people do. Not surprisingly, the states with the best public education are generally the same states that pay their teachers more and therefore have the higher property taxes. So yes, living in a state with a high property tax is a huge bummer. However, the quality of public education, which gives you a more quality workforce to make money if you're a business owner, is the payoff for that. So property taxes are often used for special programs for the state, but a lot of times you can make a direct correlation between property tax and teacher pay, which is directly associated with the quality of education, historically speaking. So the question is, what is property tax used to fund? So pause me, answer that completely. We're moving on. All right. Franchise and corporate taxes. So this is interesting, and sticking with North Carolina, this is interesting. So there is something called a franchise tax that every business that operates in North Carolina has to pay every year. All right. So the franchise tax means for every $1,000 that your business is valued at, you have to pay $1.50 for every $1,000 that you are valued at. With a minimum of $200. Now, if your business is only worth $50,000, you're not paying a ton. You're paying like in theory $60, but there's a minimum of $200. That's a franchise tax. That is basically what you have to pay every year in order to be allowed to continue to operate in North Carolina. Now, what happens here, and this is interesting, the companies that make up, so obviously there's a little section of the budget that's like for franchise tax. Well, who's making up that franchise tax? It's usually your huge mega corporations like Duke Energy, that's housed in North Carolina, is the #1 contributor to the franchise tax fund because they're worth billions. So they have to pay almost like 0.15% of their total valuation every year to the state of North Carolina just to be able to operate here. So who are the other ones that are paying these enormous amounts? It's banks. So I went and found the top 10. Basically, are all banks, and a lot of the like Bank of America, BB&T, Wells Fargo. This isn't exactly the list of who is paying it, but this is the top banks in North Carolina. These are the ones that are paying it. So a franchise tax is a tax everybody has to pay every year just as a thank you, North Carolina, for letting us stay here. So you might be like, I bet there's a state that doesn't have that and they could go and not have to pay a franchise tax. You're right. But why would these companies stay in North Carolina if they not have to pay this exorbitant franchise tax? Now, if you're a small business, it's not that much. But if you're a $1 billion business, it is a lot of money every year. Here's why. North Carolina has played the game here. North Carolina also has a corporate tax, and almost every state has a corporate tax, meaning this is the additional amount they have to pay every year on the amount of profit they make that year. North Carolina here is at 2.5%. Everybody around us is at least double that. That is why banks are very heavily invested in North Carolina, and Charlotte is kind of the financial capital of the East Coast, is North Carolina has a super low corporate tax rate. So North Carolina could raise the corporate tax rate and make more money. However, they could scare off these businesses. So North Carolina, while they have a low corporate tax rate, right, which is a percentage of how much these companies have to pay every year, they also have the franchise tax. Sorry, went brain dead there for a second. They also have the franchise tax, which is they have to pay annually, which is a basically a flat rate depending on flat rate would mean they all paid the same, so it's not a flat rate. But it is a really small percentage of their total valuation. So the franchise tax and the corporate tax, the corporate tax is going to vary a lot more every year depending on their profit, but the franchise tax is like a guaranteed every year. The reason companies will handle and deal with the franchise tax is because the corporate tax is so low in North Carolina that it's still financially worth it as opposed to being in any other state around North Carolina in which the taxes at the corporate level are almost double. So the question here is, how are franchise taxes and corporate taxes different? So pause me, answer that completely, and that's what I got for you guys today. In our next lesson, we'll be talking about local taxes. See y'all then.